In the grand spectacle of the cosmos, there exists an arena, a place where the mightiest beings from 1,000 worlds clash for glory and survival. The Galactic Colosseum. The crowd, a vibrant tapestry of species from every known quadrant, roared with a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and guttural cries. They were here for blood, for dominance, for the brutal poetry of combat. And today's main event promised just that. On one side of the vast sandy expanse stood the reigning champion, the apex, a towering creature of nightmares, a predator from a world where gravity itself was a weapon. Its hide was like obsidian armor, rippling with muscles that could shatter starship hulls. 4 crimson eyes surveyed the arena with cold, calculating intelligence, and its claws, each the size of a man's forearm, twitched in anticipation. It had never been defeated. It had never even been challenged. Then, from the opposite gate, a figure emerged, and a wave of derisive laughter swept through the stands. It was a human, Kael. Compared to the monstrous apex, he looked fragile, almost comically so. He wore simple, practical gear, not the powered armor or energy shields favored by other contestants. He carried no visible weapon, save for the quiet resolve in his eyes. The bookmakers had set the odds at 1,000,000 to 1. The crowd wasn't just expecting a fight. They were expecting a swift, brutal execution, a snack for the champion. The announcer's voice, a booming synthetic baritone, echoed through the stadium, and in this corner, from the distant and primitive world known as Earth, the challenger. Kael! The laughter intensified. Humans were a known species, but considered a minor one. Physically unimpressive, technologically adolescent. They were seen as prey, not predators. What was this one thinking? Kael walked calmly to the center of the arena, his boots sinking slightly into the alien sand. He didn't look at the jeering crowd. His gaze was fixed entirely on the apex. He could feel the creature's immense presence, a palpable aura of power that would have sent most beings scrambling for their lives. The apex let out a low growl, a sound that vibrated in Kael's very bones, a clear warning. The final gate slammed shut, and a deep gong signaled the start of the match. The crowd leaned forward, a collective holding of breath, anticipating the first and likely final explosive move. But the apex didn't charge. It stood its ground, its head tilted slightly. One of its massive, clawed hands rose, not to strike, but with its palm facing forward, a gesture. The mockery in the stands died down, replaced by a confused murmur. Kael, showing no fear, mirrored the gesture. He raised his own hand, palm out. The two stood there for a long moment, a silent, bizarre tableau of monster and man. The apex took a slow, deliberate step forward. It lowered its head, bringing its fearsome face level with Kael's. Its 4 red eyes, each a swirling vortex of ancient instinct, stared directly into Kael's calm, blue ones. The air was thick with tension. The audience was utterly silent now, bewildered by this unprecedented behavior from their bloodthirsty champion. The apex let out a soft chuffing sound, a puff of warm, musty air washing over Kael. It wasn't a sound of aggression, it was a sound of inquiry. Kael didn't flinch. He had spent years studying xenoethology, the behavior of non-humanoid species. He had pored over ancient texts and forbidden data, learning the lost languages of respect and communication that the galaxy had forgotten in its lust for violence. He knew that the apex, for all its terrifying power, was not a mindless beast. It was a creature of immense intelligence and deep-seated honor, a product of a world where true strength wasn't just about physical might, but about recognizing the strength in others. Slowly, Kael lowered his hand and bowed his head slightly, a universal gesture of respect he'd learned from a forgotten tome about the apex home world. The colossal creature responded in kind, dipping its massive horned head in a slow, deliberate nod. A wave of shock and disbelief rippled through the onlookers. This wasn't a fight. This was a conversation. The apex then did something that no one had ever seen before. It retracted its razor-sharp claws into their sheaths. It turned its back on Kael, a sign of ultimate trust among its species, and walked to the center of the arena. It then lay down, exposing its throat and underbelly, the most vulnerable parts of its body. It was a complete and total surrender. not out of fear but out of respect. It was acknowledging Kael not as prey but as an equal. A stunned silence hung over the Galactic Colosseum for a full minute before erupting into a chaotic uproar of confusion, anger, and awe. The announcers were speechless. The bookmakers were frantically trying to void the bets. In a single, silent act, Kael had done the impossible. He hadn't defeated the apex with force. He had won it over with understanding. He had shown the galaxy that there was a power greater than brute strength, the power of courage, intelligence, and empathy. Kael walked over and gently placed a hand on the apex's armored side. The creature rumbled, a deep, purring sound of contentment. In that moment, the destiny of a man and perhaps the galaxy's perception of humanity was changed forever. The weakling human who was meant to be a quick meal had just become the most respected being in the arena, not by spilling blood, but by offering a hand of peace. The crowd, which had come for a spectacle of violence, was left with a profound and unsettling question: what is true strength? Kael stood tall, the quiet master of the arena, his victory echoing far beyond the blood-stained sands of the Colosseum, sending ripples across the stars. Humanity was no longer just prey. They were a species to be watched, to be respected, and perhaps to be learned from. The silence in the arena was deafening. Every spectator, from the tiniest alien to the largest predator, stared in disbelief. Kael remained perfectly still, his small frame dwarfed by the sheer size of the apex, yet there was no fear in his eyes. Instead, there was calm, a quiet awareness that seemed to unsettle even the most battle-hardened creatures in the audience. Whispers spread, growing louder as the crowd tried to interpret what was unfolding. Has the apex gone mad? One alien muttered, or is it recognizing him? Asked another. The concept was incomprehensible. No being had ever earned acknowledgement from the apex without first proving themselves in combat. And yet, Kael had done nothing, said nothing, and remained entirely vulnerable. The apex circled him slowly, its glowing eyes never leaving the human. Every movement was precise, deliberate, and terrifying in its elegance. Kael felt the weight of those eyes on him, the predator's assessment running deeper than any physical test could measure. It wasn't just his strength that was being observed. It was his resolve, his spirit, the very essence of what made him human. The arena's spectators had never seen such a confrontation, one without violence, yet so charged with unspoken tension that even the loudest predator warriors shivered. Kael understood instinctively that the apex was looking for something. He didn't know what, but he felt the invisible thread connecting them, a bond forming in silence. Then the unexpected happened. The apex stepped back slightly and let out a low, resonant sound that rolled across the arena. It was neither a roar nor a growl, but something in between, a communication, a message of recognition. The crowd leaned forward, desperate to understand. Some tried to laugh again, but the sound died in their throats. No one dared move. Kael's heartbeat quickened, not from fear, but from comprehension. The apex was acknowledging him, not as prey, not as a challenge, but as a being worthy of its attention. Something deep within him, something primal that humans often ignored, had resonated with this predator. Suddenly, a group of alien spectators moved forward, brimming with arrogance. They had come to see a weak human destroyed, to revel in his failure, and perhaps even claim his demise for glory. One of them stepped closer, gesturing aggressively. "Step aside, tiny one," it said, voice dripping with condescension. "This is no place for your kind. The apex will finish this, and we will celebrate." Kael's eyes flickered briefly toward them, calm, yet piercing. He made no move, yet the air shifted. The apex let out a guttural noise, a warning unlike any the audience had ever heard. The aggressive aliens froze, their bravado crumbling as the predator's focus turned from Kael to them. In an instant, the entire arena understood the apex had claimed Kael. Anyone who dared interfere would face its wrath. That realization sent a wave of awe and terror across the crowd. Kael, the tiny human, had survived the first moments not because of brute strength, but because of an invisible force that the galaxy could not understand. The apex's attention was a declaration. He was no longer a joke. He was no longer prey. From this point on, he had the protection of the deadliest being in existence, and the repercussions would echo across worlds. Even the strongest aliens who had dominated countless arenas before began to reconsider their assumptions. Humans were fragile, yes, but Kael's calm, in the face of ultimate threat, hinted at something far more dangerous than anyone imagined. Time seemed to slow. Kael felt the predator's presence surrounding him, a shield as intangible as it was real. He could sense the apex's thoughts, its judgments, its awareness. It was teaching him without speaking, challenging him without striking. Every movement the predator made carried a lesson, every pause a test of patience and resolve. The audience had no idea that the tiny human before them was undergoing a trial far greater than any combat. His endurance, his courage, and his understanding of the predator's silent commands were being shaped in real time. And Kael knew that this experience would transform him in ways the galaxy could not yet comprehend. Hours seemed to pass, though perhaps it was only minutes. The apex's circling slowed, and for the first time, it lowered its massive head to Kael's level. Their eyes met, predator and human, and the connection was undeniable. A silent promise hung between them, a recognition that Kael was no ordinary being. He had survived the first encounter not because of weapons or numbers, but because of the qualities the galaxy had overlooked: intelligence, patience, and the courage to stand still when everyone expected him to crumble. The crowd began to murmur again, but this time with uncertainty. Questions filled the air. Who is this human? How can someone so small command the attention of the apex? Kael exhaled slowly, realizing the significance of what had just occurred. He had stepped into the arena expecting fear, mockery, and perhaps death. Instead, he had captured the attention of the deadliest predator in the galaxy, a being that no one dared defy. The laughter of the galaxy had begun to fade, replaced by a mixture of fear, curiosity, and awe. From this moment onward, Kael's journey had changed. He was no longer simply a human among aliens. He had become a figure that the galaxy would remember, the first to earn recognition from the apex not through destruction, but through presence. And as the sun of Zarim began to set, casting long shadows across the arena, Kael felt a sense of purpose growing within him. The mockery of the galaxy had ended. The predator had chosen, and in that choice lay a promise of power, survival, and a destiny that stretched far beyond what he had ever imagined. The real trial was only beginning, and Kael knew that every step forward would be watched, tested, and perhaps envied. But for the first time in his life, he was no longer alone. He had the apex at his side, and together they would redefine the meaning of strength in a universe that had once laughed at him. In the cold, unforgiving expanse of the cosmos, humanity was just another fledgling species, easy prey for the apex. These creatures were the galaxy's ultimate predators, beings of immense power and ancient lineage. To them we were nothing more than fleeting sparks in the darkness, a resource to be consumed. But then came Kael. He wasn't a soldier, a politician, or a genius scientist. He was an exobiologist, a man who saw wonder where others saw only monsters. Stranded on a desolate moon after his research vessel was torn apart, Kael came face to face with an apex. Death seemed certain. Yet, instead of running or fighting, Kael did something unthinkable. He stood his ground, not in defiance, but in respect. The apex, a towering behemoth of claws and iridescent armor, had been wounded in a territorial dispute. It was cornered, aggressive, and ready to obliterate anything that moved. Kael, using his knowledge of alien biology, noticed the subtle signs of its injury. Slowly, cautiously, he approached, not with a weapon, but with a synthesized biopoultice from his medikit. He didn't try to communicate with words. His actions spoke a universal language. I see your pain. I mean no harm. For what felt like an eternity, the two beings were locked in a silent standoff. The apex's razor-sharp mandibles twitched, its multifaceted eyes analyzing Kael's every move. Then, in a moment that would forever alter the course of galactic history, the apex lowered its head, allowing Kael to apply the healing salve. News of Kael's survival and his impossible encounter sent shockwaves through human territories. When a rescue team finally arrived, they didn't find Kael's remains. They found him alive, with the apex standing guard over him like a loyal sentinel. The predator didn't just spare him, it had accepted him. This singular act of interspecies respect shattered every preconceived notion humanity held about the apex. They weren't just mindless beasts. They were intelligent. They had a code, and Kael had somehow cracked it. He became a hero overnight, the man who tamed the monster. But his newfound fame was a double-edged sword. To many, he was a beacon of hope, proof that peace was possible. But to others, he was a traitor. Political factions that had built their power on fear-mongering and military buildup now saw Kael as a threat. They claimed he had allied himself with the enemy, that his actions had compromised humanity's security. Conspiracy theories swirled. Was he brainwashed? Was this all an elaborate apex trick, a prelude to a full-scale invasion? Kael was pulled from his quiet life of research and thrust into a whirlwind of political intrigue and public scrutiny. He was called to testify before galactic councils, his every word twisted and analyzed. The pressure was immense. The very people he sought to protect were now vilifying him. He was isolated, caught between a species that didn't understand him and a species that now revered him in a way he couldn't comprehend. Personally, the change was even more profound. Kael was no longer just Kael. He was a symbol. He carried the weight of two species on his shoulders. Old friends grew distant, intimidated by his new status or convinced by the negative propaganda. His life became a lonely vigil. The only being who truly seemed to understand him was the one who couldn't speak his language. The apex, which he had named Echo, for its ability to mirror his intent, would occasionally appear at the edge of human-controlled space, its silent presence a strange comfort. It was a reminder of that moment on the moon, a pure, uncomplicated act of trust that had become so hopelessly complicated. Kael's journey was just beginning. He had to navigate a galaxy that was both terrified and in awe of him. He had earned the respect of a predator, but now he had to earn the trust of his own kind all over again. His story became a legend, a testament to the idea that courage isn't always about fighting but about understanding. In a universe defined by conflict, one man showed that the bridge to peace could be built not with weapons, but with empathy. Kael's legacy wasn't about taming a beast. It was about reminding us all of the humanity and the intelligence that can be found in the most unexpected of places. Word of Kael's bond with the apex spread like wildfire through the galaxy, reaching ears that were far from friendly. Among the most ambitious of the Interstellar Council's factions, whispers of his survival and recognition by the deadliest predator stoked both fear and anger. They had dismissed humans for centuries, a tiny, fragile species beneath notice. And now one had not only survived an impossible trial, but had earned an ally that no one could oppose. Some saw opportunity, others threat. Soon, a coalition of elite hunters and mercenaries decided to test Kael directly. They would challenge the tiny human and, if possible, eliminate him before his legend grew further. Kael sensed the change long before the fleet arrived. The apex's body tensed beside him, muscles rippling like steel cables, eyes glowing brighter against the dim Zareem dusk. The predator's senses were attuned to danger in ways that Kael could barely comprehend, yet he felt a strange reassurance. He had no weapons, no armor, and yet the mere presence of the apex made him feel untouchable. The humans on Earth had never faced enemies like these, and Kael knew that his survival now depended on both instinct and the silent bond he shared with the predator. Every step, every movement would have to be precise. One mistake could mean destruction, not just for him, but for the apex as well. The first ship broke the horizon, a sleek, black vessel bristling with weapons designed for speed and annihilation. Kael didn't flinch. He raised his eyes toward the sky, and the apex's growl vibrated through the ground, a warning that resonated in the bones of anyone who dared approach. The alien fleet slowed, sensing the presence of a predator that could obliterate them before they even reached the surface. Yet they pressed on, confident in their numbers, in their technology, in their belief that a human could not withstand such power. Their arrogance would prove costly. Kael took a step forward, feeling the apex move in perfect synchrony beside him. The predator's massive claws scratched against the stone, not in anger but in anticipation, as though it were teaching Kael something beyond survival, teaching him how to command presence, how to project a power that transcended physical size. The first ship fired, launching a volley of energy that lit the sky. Kael instinctively ducked, but the apex moved first, a massive shadow diving between him and the attack. The energy bolt splintered harmlessly against the predator's armored hide. The alien fleet faltered for the first time, uncertainty creeping into their tactics. Kael's mind raced. He realized that he didn't need to fight in the way they expected. Every move the apex made could be anticipated, every tactic mirrored. He began to understand the predator's silent language, the subtle shifts in muscle, the nearly imperceptible tilt of its head. When the next wave of attacks came, Kael stepped lightly, weaving between the projected energy streams, and the apex's massive form blocked anything he could not evade. Together they moved as one, predator and human, each reinforcing the other, creating a rhythm that the attackers could not anticipate. Chaos erupted among the alien fleet as their precision strikes failed repeatedly. The most experienced hunter among them, a towering being covered in scales and spikes, finally landed on the surface, determined to confront Kael directly. Its weapon was enormous, designed to pierce the toughest hide in the galaxy, and yet the human did not flinch. Kael's small frame was already moving, guided by instincts honed under the apex's tutelage. The predator let out a deafening roar, a sound that split the air and made the hunter hesitate. In that pause, Kael saw the opening and struck not with weapons, but with strategy and speed. He dodged, misdirected, and maneuvered with a precision no alien had anticipated, leading the hunter directly into the predator's path. In a single, fluid motion, the apex intercepted, a strike that shattered the hunter's weapon and sent it sprawling across the ground. The remaining forces froze. The tiny human, unarmed and fragile, had survived the first confrontation without directly harming anyone. And yet, in his wake, the fleet realized that Kael was no ordinary human. He had something the galaxy had never seen: a combination of intellect, calm under pressure, and an unspoken alliance with the deadliest creature in existence. Fear replaced arrogance. Doubt replaced confidence. Whispers spread through the alien ranks. How can one human command such power? How can one human survive the apex? Kael breathed steadily, aware of the predator beside him, sensing the subtle cues that guided his every movement. He knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy would continue to challenge him, to underestimate him, and to seek his destruction. Yet he also knew that every trial, every threat, every hostile gaze was preparing him for something far greater. The apex had chosen him, claimed him, and through that choice, Kael was learning to survive, adapt, and ultimately, to command respect in a universe that had long refused to acknowledge humans. As the alien fleet retreated, humiliated and fearful, Kael felt a surge of determination. The galaxy had mocked him, but the apex had claimed him. And from that moment on, Kael understood the truth. Survival was no longer enough. He had to rise, to show the galaxy that humans were not to be underestimated. Every planet, every council, every predator and warrior would come to know the name Kael. The tiny human had become something else entirely, and the galaxy's laughter was already turning into something far more dangerous: recognition and fear. The events on Zarim spread across the galaxy faster than any fleet could travel. Communications networks buzzed with recordings, reports, and eyewitness accounts of a tiny human who had survived the apex trial and bested an entire alien strike force without wielding a weapon. Some called it a miracle. Others whispered of unnatural power, perhaps a human enhanced beyond comprehension. Entire worlds debated whether Kael was a fluke, an anomaly, or the harbinger of a new era. Merchants, soldiers, and scholars all speculated, while warriors and predators alike quietly feared the implications. The idea that one human could hold sway over the deadliest being in the galaxy challenged centuries of belief. Back on Zarim, Kael trained with relentless focus. The apex moved beside him constantly, teaching subtle lessons of perception, strategy, and instinct. Kael's body had changed since the arena. His reflexes were faster, his mind sharper, and his awareness stretched beyond the ordinary. Even the predator seemed impressed by the speed with which Kael adapted. Each movement, each thought, each decision became a dance of unspoken communication between human and apex. The predator's presence amplified his capabilities. But it was not magic, it was discipline, trust, and understanding that transcended species. Kael knew the galaxy would not wait for him to grow slowly. Challenges would come, and he had to be ready. Reports arrived from other worlds almost immediately. Smaller human colonies, long considered insignificant by the interstellar powers, began to take notice. Children told stories of Kael's triumph, merchants used his legend to sell goods, and scholars began studying humanity's adaptability in a new light. For the first time, humans were more than fragile, weak beings. They had an example of courage and ingenuity that defied expectations. Even the council could not ignore the whispers. Delegates began arguing that humanity might hold untapped potential that could shift galactic balances if properly nurtured or contained. Not all attention was favorable. Rival factions grew anxious, fearful that a single human, allied with the apex, could disrupt centuries of power and hierarchy. One coalition, the Moron Syndicate, sent an envoy to Zarim, ostensibly to negotiate, but Kael understood the truth at a glance. The envoy's fleet was a thinly veiled threat, intended to probe his defenses and gauge the strength of the human-predator alliance. Kael watched from the cliffs as the ships approached, the apex's glowing eyes reflecting in his own. He did not panic. Instead he focused, drawing on everything the predator had taught him. Timing, perception, instinct, they were tools he had learned to use, and he was ready. The envoy's flagship landed and a delegation emerged. Towering figures, armored and heavily armed, walked confidently toward Kael, their movements radiating arrogance. One of them spoke, voice amplified and dripping with condescension. "Human," it said, "your audacity has caused amusement. But the galaxy will not tolerate a single insignificant species commanding a predator. We demand you step aside or face consequences." Kael's gaze did not waver. His calmness, his unshakable presence, caused hesitation even in these seasoned warriors. The apex moved slightly in front of him, a silent warning. The delegation faltered, sensing that their expectations of fear and weakness would not be met. Kael understood that this was a test, not only of his strength but of perception and restraint. He spoke, voice steady, clear, and unafraid. "You may judge humans as weak. You may mock us, underestimate us, and send armies to test your assumptions. But I am here now, and I stand with the apex. Any action against me will have consequences far greater than you anticipate." His words carried a weight no one expected. They were calm, deliberate, and imbued with authority that transcended physical size. The apex growled low in agreement, an echo that vibrated through the assembled delegation, breaking their confidence. The syndicate members exchanged uneasy glances. They had expected a human to cower, to beg, to falter. Instead, they found someone who radiated control, courage, and a silent but unmistakable bond with the galaxy's deadliest predator. After tense moments, they withdrew, sending veiled threats, but leaving Kael and the apex unchallenged. The tiny human had survived once again, not through combat, but through presence, intelligence, and an understanding that the galaxy could not easily predict. As night fell over Zarim, Kael stood with the apex on the cliff overlooking the arena and the distant mountains beyond. He realized that his life had irrevocably changed. He was no longer a human in the shadows, unnoticed and dismissed. The galaxy had laughed at him, but now both friend and foe understood that Kael could not be ignored. He felt a growing resolve, a sense that what lay ahead would not be measured in hours or days, but in battles of influence, strategy, and survival across stars. The apex beside him was not just a guardian, but a teacher, a partner, and a symbol of the power that humans could achieve when underestimated no longer. Kael's journey was far from over. Rival factions would continue to challenge him. The council would debate his place in galactic affairs, and predators and warriors alike would test his abilities in ways he could not yet imagine. But for the first time, Kael knew he was ready. He had faced the arena, survived the apex, repelled the first challenge, and claimed his place as a human worthy of attention. The galaxy had mocked him, but the apex had claimed him, and that claim would echo across the stars, reshaping perceptions and redefining what it meant to be human in a universe that had long dismissed him. The galaxy was watching. Kael's name had become a symbol of unexpected power, whispered across star systems, feared in council chambers, and envied in predator clans. But whispers and fame did not protect him from action. The Maroon Syndicate, humiliated by their earlier failure, had assembled a massive coalition fleet, combining their best warriors, technology, and mercenary forces to eliminate the human and test the apex directly. They had calculated every possible advantage, confident that even with the Predator's presence, Kael could not survive an assault of this scale. They were wrong. The fleet emerged from hyperspace above Zareem, their ships like dark constellations against the twin suns. Kael stood at the planet's surface, the apex towering behind him, a shadow so vast that the ground seemed to tremble beneath its weight. His mind raced, not with fear, but with anticipation. He had trained, adapted, and observed every subtle cue from the Predator. He knew the apex's movements, its instincts, and its silent guidance. Even in the face of overwhelming numbers, Kael felt ready. The first wave of ships fired, energy streaking toward the surface in deadly arcs. The apex moved first, massive claws tearing through projectiles, and Kael mirrored its timing, moving with precision, evading debris and falling equipment. Together they were unstoppable. The fleet unleashed wave after wave, and yet each attack was countered almost effortlessly. Kael had begun to anticipate patterns, predicting the enemy's movements before they executed them. The apex communicated without words, each subtle gesture guiding him, reinforcing his awareness. Kael realized that he was no longer merely surviving, he was orchestrating. The combination of human intellect and predator instinct created a rhythm that the attackers could not penetrate. Alien warriors fell one by one, not because Kael was stronger in force, but because he was faster in perception and strategy. The battlefield became a demonstration of synergy, the predator and human moving as one. Amid the chaos, a squadron of elite predators, allies of the Maroon Syndicate, descended to confront them directly. These beings had no fear, no hesitation, and weapons designed to penetrate the toughest armor, but Kael did not flinch. He felt the apex tense beside him, muscles coiled, eyes gleaming with awareness. The predators attacked with lightning speed, claws slashing, energy beams cutting the air. Kael dodged, parried, and maneuvered instinctively, relying on training and the silent guidance of the apex. Each predator underestimated the human, expecting fear, expecting chaos. Instead, they found precision, adaptability, and an unyielding calm that disrupted their attacks. The largest predator among them, a towering figure covered in iridescent scales, lunged at Kael directly. Its claws gleamed, energy coursing along its limbs. Kael leapt, twisting, dodging, and in perfect timing the apex intercepted, striking with a force that shattered the predator's armor and sent it crashing into the rocks. The remaining enemies faltered, realizing too late that the tiny human had become a strategic threat far beyond their comprehension. The coordination between Kael and the apex created an invisible barrier, a web of movement and prediction that no adversary could navigate successfully. Despite the destruction around him, Kael remained composed. He understood the power of perception, patience, and timing. Each attack that came his way was an opportunity to learn, to adapt, and to assert dominance in a way that was subtle yet undeniable. The coalition fleet realized that sheer numbers were meaningless against a force that anticipated, calculated, and acted in perfect unison with a being far beyond human scale. Every ship that approached, every predator that lunged, faltered, not due to the human strength alone, but because the apex's presence magnified his capability, turning the smallest human into a figure of legend. Hours seemed to pass, though perhaps only minutes. When the last attacking ship disengaged, the silence that followed was profound. Kael and the apex stood together on the surface of Zareem, battered but unbowed. Smoke and debris filled the air, yet neither showed signs of fatigue that mattered. The galaxy had witnessed a human survive a battle that would have destroyed entire fleets. The Maroon Syndicate's elite warriors had returned to their ships, their arrogance shattered, their confidence replaced by fear and disbelief. Kael had proven, beyond any doubt, that humans were not to be dismissed. As the twin suns dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the rocky landscape, Kael stood with the apex at his side, understanding the truth fully now. The galaxy's laughter had ended. The Apex's claim was real. And from this moment onward, every planet, every predator, every counselor, and every soldier would think twice before underestimating the smallest species in existence. The tiny human had survived, had commanded respect, and had reshaped perceptions. The path ahead was still fraught with danger, but Kael felt something new. Confidence, not arrogance, but the knowledge that he was no longer a prey species, no longer a joke, and no longer alone. The Apex had claimed him, and together they would challenge the galaxy's assumptions in ways no one could yet imagine. The aftermath of the battle spread across star systems like a shockwave. Holonet transmissions, encrypted messages, and whispered rumors all carried the story. A tiny human had survived the Apex trial, bested an elite predator squad, and repelled a coalition fleet with nothing but wits and instinct amplified by the deadliest predator in existence. Entire planetary governments convened emergency sessions to discuss the implications. Once dismissed species humans were now viewed as potential game changers. Even the Interstellar Council, long accustomed to treating humanity as insignificant, debated whether Kael's survival signaled a shift in the cosmic balance. Some argued for containment, fearing that if humans gained too much influence, centuries of carefully maintained power hierarchies could crumble. Others, more cautious, suggested observation, hoping to understand the human's abilities before making a decisive move. Kael, however, remained grounded. On Zareem, he trained tirelessly with the Apex, refining his senses, movements, and mental acuity. Each session honed his perception of danger, his ability to predict attacks, and his capacity to act in perfect harmony with the predator. The Apex's silent guidance was relentless, almost overwhelming at times, but Kael adapted, learning to interpret subtle gestures and instinctive cues that revealed threats before they fully materialized. The bond between them had deepened beyond survival. It had become symbiosis. The predator provided strength and protection, while Kael contributed strategy, adaptability, and human ingenuity. Together, they were evolving into a force that the galaxy had never witnessed. Meanwhile, rival factions were plotting. The Miron Syndicate, embarrassed and enraged by their defeat, began assembling alliances with other powerful species. Their objective was simple: remove Kael before his legend could grow further. They underestimated him, as all others had, believing that a human, even one allied with the Apex, could eventually be broken or destroyed with overwhelming force. Secret assassins and elite strike teams were dispatched, each tasked with gathering intelligence or, if possible, eliminating Kael outright. They studied the predator's behavior, hoping to find a weakness. What they didn't understand was that Kael's strength wasn't just in survival. It was in observation, timing, and adaptation. Each attack, each probe, only strengthened him. The political landscape shifted dramatically. Some systems, previously hostile to humanity, began reconsidering alliances. Merchants, scientists, and smaller human colonies rallied around Kael's growing legend. Propaganda and storytelling painted him as more than a survivor. He became a symbol of human resilience, courage, and unexpected strength. Children imitated his stance, scholars studied his tactics, and soldiers speculated about his potential in battle. Kael's existence challenged centuries of prejudice against humans. Species that had once dismissed them as weak, inconsequential, or fragile now feared underestimating them. One evening, as Kael and the Apex observed the stars from a rocky plateau, the predator emitted a low hum, a sound Kael had learned to interpret. Danger was approaching not from a single ship or strike team, but from an organized fleet far larger than anything Kael had faced before. The Miron Syndicate had coordinated with other factions, forming a coalition of hundreds of ships and elite predators. Their intent was no longer subtle, it was a declaration: remove the human or face galactic consequences. Kael's heart did not race in panic, it focused. The Apex circled him, sensing the incoming threat, and together they prepared. The coalition fleet emerged over Zareem like a black cloud. Its ships moved with precision, weapons bristling, ready to strike. Kael's eyes narrowed. He understood that brute force alone could not overcome this enemy. Strategy, anticipation, and the Apex's unmatched instincts were his greatest assets. He calculated, planned and positioned himself, relying on the Predator's guidance and his own growing intuition. The first shots were fired, illuminating the horizon, yet Kael moved as if invisible, dodging energy bolts and anticipating attacks. The Apex responded in perfect synchrony, neutralizing threats before they could land. The galaxy watched, astonished, as the smallest human orchestrated survival against overwhelming odds. Despite the magnitude of the threat, Kael's presence exuded calm authority. He realized that this battle was more than physical. It was a test of perception, leadership, and influence. The human Apex duo had become a symbol, a challenge to every assumption in the galaxy. Whoever witnessed them understood that survival was no longer a matter of scale or firepower. It was about understanding, adaptation, and the unpredictable courage of a species long underestimated. As night fell over Zarim, the fleet hesitated, uncertain of how to proceed against a force they could neither predict nor contain. Kael and the Apex stood together, ready for whatever came next. In that moment, Kael felt a clarity he had never known. The galaxy had mocked him, but the Apex had claimed him. Every challenge, every threat, every whisper of doubt had only strengthened him. And now, with the entire coalition poised to test his limits, Kael understood the truth. He was no longer just a tiny human in a universe of giants. He was a force, a symbol, and a challenge. And the galaxy would soon learn that mocking humans came with consequences far greater than anyone could imagine. In the cold expanse of the galaxy, the coalition fleet was a sight to behold. 1,000 warships, bristling with advanced weaponry, blotting out the stars as they descended upon the desert planet of Zarim. Their mission, to crush a fledgling rebellion and capture a legendary prize. On the planet's surface, a lone human, Kael, stood beside his ally, an Apex, one of the galaxy's most feared predators. Against 1,000 ships, they were just two. To the coalition, this was a simple extermination. For Kael and the Apex, it was just another Tuesday. The coalition generals, confident in their overwhelming numbers, scoffed at the primitive defenses. But they didn't know Kael. He wasn't a warrior. He was a strategist, a chess master playing with entire star systems. He had spent weeks studying Zarim's unique geology, its volatile electromagnetic fields, and its treacherous canyons. His mind was a supercomputer, and his bond with the Apex was the key. They were perfectly synchronized, a seamless blend of human intellect and alien predatory instinct. The first wave of coalition forces descended, elite shock troops expecting an easy victory. Instead, they walked into a death trap. Kael used Zarim's magnetic storms to scramble their communications and navigation systems, plunging them into chaos. Squads were separated, lost in the swirling sand. And that's when the Apex struck. A phantom in the storm, it moved with impossible speed and precision, dismantling entire units before they could even raise their weapons. Panic spread through the coalition comms channels, reports of a shadow that hunted them, a ghost that couldn't be hit. Frustrated, the coalition commander sent in his champion, a renowned predator from a warrior race, equipped with the latest combat armor and a reputation for never failing. The champion landed, searching for his elusive target. The duel was inevitable, but Kael had anticipated this. He wasn't just directing the Apex. He was its eyes and ears, seeing the battlefield from 1,000 different angles. He guided the Apex through a series of feint and evasive maneuvers, luring the champion deeper into a network of narrow, unstable canyons. The champion was powerful, but his strength was his weakness. He relied on brute force, on overwhelming his opponents. Kael and the Apex, however, were a symphony of tactics. As the champion charged, the Apex, guided by Kael's precise timing, triggered a seismic charge hidden in the canyon wall. A massive rock slide erupted, not to crush the champion, but to trap him. Boxed in and disoriented, the champion was suddenly vulnerable. The Apex moved in, not with a roar, but with silent, calculated efficiency. The fight was over in seconds. The invincible champion was defeated, not by superior strength, but by superior thinking. The news of the champion's fall shattered the coalition's morale. Their elite forces were being picked apart by an unseen enemy. Their command structure was in disarray, and their greatest warrior had been outsmarted. They saw Zarim not as a prize, but as a tomb. The order was given for a full retreat. The massive fleet, once a symbol of galactic might, turned and fled, leaving Zareem in peace. Back on the planet's surface, as the dust settled, Kael placed a hand on his ally's shoulder. They had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious. The news of their triumph spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Kael, the human strategist, and his apex partner became legends. Their story was a powerful reminder that in the vastness of space, the greatest weapon isn't the size of your fleet or the power of your cannons. It's the strength of your mind and the bond you share with an ally. They proved that true power doesn't come from brute force, but from the brilliant fusion of intelligence and instinct. In the sprawling, chaotic expanse of the galaxy, humans were an afterthought. We were the newcomers, the underdogs, dismissed by ancient, powerful alien civilizations. But they forgot one crucial thing about us: never ever count a human out. And they definitely didn't count on Kael. Kael wasn't a soldier or a diplomat. He was a scavenger picking through the cosmic junkyards on forgotten moons, just trying to survive. Life was tough, lonely, and frankly, pretty bleak. Then one day, inside the husk of a crashed alien freighter, he found something that would change not just his life, but the galaxy itself. It was a creature, a juvenile, injured and scared. But this wasn't just any creature. It was a member of the Kael, a species known across the systems as the ultimate apex predators. They were legendary hunters, feared for their intelligence, strength, and brutal efficiency. And this one was just a baby. Every instinct screamed at Kael to run. A full-grown Kael could tear through a platoon of armored soldiers. But looking at the small, whimpering creature, he saw not a monster, but a kindred spirit alone and fighting for its life. Against all reason, he decided to help. He named it Fang. Their bond wasn't forged overnight. It was built on shared meals in dusty cantinas, narrow escapes from rival scavengers, and quiet moments staring out at the star-dusted void. Kael taught Fang about trust and loyalty. Fang, in turn, taught Kael how to see the galaxy not as a threat but as a hunting ground. As Fang grew, so did their reputation. At first it was just whispers. A human and a Kael working together? Impossible. Preposterous. But then the whispers turned into stories. Stories of a duo who could outsmart ruthless pirates, navigate treacherous asteroid fields, and take on jobs no one else dared to touch. They became a force to be reckoned with. The alien syndicates that once laughed at the pathetic human now offered him contracts worth small fortunes. The military commanders who dismissed his species now sought his counsel. Kael, the scavenger, was now Kael, the legend. And at his side always was Fang, no longer a scared juvenile, but a magnificent, terrifying apex predator, utterly devoted to his human companion. Their most famous exploit? The Siege of Xylos. The notorious Cathar syndicate had taken a vital trading hub hostage, their fleet forming an impenetrable blockade. The Galactic Council was paralyzed. But Kael and Fang weren't. Using a combination of Kael's brilliant, unconventional tactics and Fang's unparalleled combat prowess, they slipped through the blockade. They didn't just break the siege. They dismantled the syndicate from the inside out. It was a masterclass in guerrilla warfare. When the dust settled, the Cathar were broken, and a human and his alien companions stood victorious. They weren't just respected anymore, they were feared. Kael and Fang proved that true strength isn't about where you come from or what species you are. It is about the bonds you forge and the courage to stand up when everyone else tells you to stand down. They started as two lost souls in a hostile galaxy, but together they became its most unlikely and unstoppable heroes. Their story is a reminder that even in the darkest corners of space, the most powerful force is loyalty, and even the biggest underdog can have the sharpest teeth. The galaxy had never witnessed anything like this. Kael stood at the edge of Zareem's largest plateau, the apex looming beside him, both figures silhouetted against the twin suns setting on the horizon. The coalition fleets that had once dared challenge him now approached again, this time in unprecedented numbers, carrying the most elite predators, the deadliest weapons, and the arrogance of those convinced they could finally eliminate the tiny human. But Kael no longer feared numbers, weapons, or strength. He had learned, trained, and evolved. Every failure, every challenge, every observation had prepared him for this moment. The first salvo struck, energy lances carving through the sky. Kael moved with uncanny precision, anticipating trajectories before they fully formed. The apex mirrored his movements, intercepting attacks with effortless power, while Kael used the predator's guidance to maneuver in ways the enemy could not predict. Ships crashed into one another, predators fell to the ground, and chaos spread through the fleet like wildfire. The attackers had assumed they would overwhelm him with sheer scale, but they underestimated the combination of human intellect and apex instinct. Every strike, dodge, and movement was synchronized, almost choreographed, creating an unbreakable rhythm that no enemy could disrupt. Amid the chaos, the Moron Syndicate's leader, a towering predator known across galaxies for cruelty and cunning, descended to the planet's surface, determined to end Kael directly. Its claws glowed with lethal energy, its roar echoing across the cliffs. Kael didn't flinch. He met the predator's gaze, reading the smallest shifts in posture, predicting intent. With a swift combination of movement and strategy, he led the predator into the apex's path. In a single fluid motion, the apex struck, incapacitating the leader while Kael avoided a lethal counterattack. The battlefield fell into stunned silence as the remaining forces paused, realizing the human had turned prediction and observation into a weapon more potent than any fleet. Kael felt the weight of the moment, the culmination of every battle, every trial, and every lesson learned. He realized that survival alone was no longer enough. Leadership, strategy, and courage had become his tools. With the apex beside him, he moved across the battlefield, guiding strikes, neutralizing threats, and demonstrating to the galaxy that humans were no longer to be dismissed. The coalition fleet faltered, confusion spreading among their ranks. What had begun as an attempt to destroy a single human had turned into a display of dominance, strategy, and the unshakable bond between man and predator. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in fiery red and gold, Kael stood tall, breathing steadily. The surviving fleet, exhausted and demoralized, retreated into space, unwilling to challenge a force they could neither predict nor match. Kael's reputation solidified in a single day, transcending fear and respect. The apex's growl resonated beside him, a low hum of approval that Kael had come to understand as recognition and partnership. Together, they had survived impossible odds, repelled overwhelming forces, and proved to the galaxy that humans could defy expectations in ways that were unpredictable and profound. In the days that followed, Kael's influence grew. Alliances formed around him, recognizing the value of a human who had mastered survival, strategy, and instinct. Rival factions reevaluated their approaches, choosing diplomacy over confrontation, understanding that direct conflict would result in ruin. The Interstellar Council, once dismissive of humanity, now debated terms, treaties, and cooperation. Kael's existence had forced the galaxy to reconsider its assumptions about species, strength, and the unpredictable potential of the smallest beings. As Kael and the apex stood together under Zareem's twin moons, the human reflected on the journey that had brought him here. Mocked by the galaxy, he had survived arenas, ambushes, fleets, and elite predators. Claimed by the apex, he had become more than a survivor. He had become a symbol, a force and a challenge that no being could ignore. Kael understood that the galaxy would continue to test him, but he no longer saw this as a threat. It was opportunity, growth, and proof that humans once underestimated could rise to greatness when guided by courage, intelligence, and unlikely allies. For the first time, Kael smiled, feeling the weight of the apex beside him. The galaxy's mockery had ended. He had been claimed not only by a predator but by destiny itself. And as the stars twinkled across Zareem's night sky, Kael knew one truth above all. Humans would no longer be dismissed, and the legend of the tiny human who stood unbowed beside the apex would echo across the cosmos for generations to come. The universe had learned a lesson. The smallest beings could wield the greatest influence, and the tiniest human had forever changed the balance of the galaxy.